This happened around July of 2014. Some backdrop. I'm a 19-year-old female, and at the time of this event, I was 18. Me and my friends live in a small town of Stony Creek, Ontario. Living in Canada, we're generally not very concerned about rapists, pedophiles, or murderers. It was summer, before we headed off to university, and we all just wanted to have a really good time. The five of us decided that we would have a sleepover at my friend's house, who lived around a nice, somewhat suburban neighborhood. So 9:30 rolls around, and here we are blasting music, drinking, and just generally having a good time. At this point in the night, me and my friend decided that we should totally go get a late night snack. Since I had drank 2 coolers, I couldn't drive. The G2 regulations of driving demanded that we have a 0 blood alcohol level. No worries, or so we thought. A local Subway restaurant was just about 15 minutes away from where my friend lives. So me and my friend were just walking on the sidewalk. My friend, being a little drunk, decides to talk in a really loud and obnoxious voice about how hungry she is. Sadly, the alcoholic high that I was feeling begins to fade quickly, leaving me to contend with a drunken, overactive teenager. As we're walking, we hear rustling. We look up to see a man sitting on his porch just staring at us. This guy looked vaguely familiar to me, but I just couldn't pinpoint where I'd seen him before. He looked relatively tall, had black hair, and was a tad bit overweight. As we were passing him, I noticed that he kept on looking at my friend. I kind of shrugged it off, and thought maybe he found her attractive since she was short and looked way too young to be 18. Older men were just typically drawn to her. As we were walking just past his small white house, I hear him call after us. I turn around, and there he is in a gray shirt, black sweatpants, and just creepily staring at us. As we came to a stop, he proceeded to ask us where we were going. Before I could muster a more benign response, my friend happily tells him that we're going to Subway for a snack. She's not usually the type to act this sociable, and is being totally oblivious to the weird vibes this creep is giving off to me. As his piercing gaze lands back onto my friend, he goes on to ask how old she is. Now I really start to feel scared. I know when an older man asks about a young girl's age, nothing good can come from the situation. I try to signal with my eyes to her not to answer, when she stupidly blurts out that she's 18 years old. The creep's eyes flicker for a second from her response. He tells her that she looks younger than 18, to where she giggly replies that she often hears that quite a bit. At this point, I just want to leave badly. This guy is approaching closer to my friend, and I grab her arm, pulling her towards my side. And the guy finally looks back at me and asks us if we want to come join him on his porch. I quickly muster a no as I try to push her down the sidewalk. But before I can turn around, he looks back to my friend and says in a deep, raspy voice that he'll see her again before the night is over. I look down at her, and the terror is clearly drawn on her face. Now I know we need to leave. I haul her in front of me, and we speed walk to Subway, which is just about 6 minutes away. As I look back, I can see the creep staring her up and down, just before he looks to me. He opens his mouth in a shiver-inducing smirk, which bares his teeth. He then proceeds to nod and turn back up to his porch steps. I'm basically running by now, carrying my pale-looking friend with me as we walk into Subway. Quickly, I recite the orders to the lady behind the counter, urging her with my eyes to pick up the pace, because I just want to get back to my friends. As the woman goes about making our subs, I feel shivers run across my skin. I turn my head to the side, and as I look out the windows, I see that guy again. He's right outside of Subway, and he's just staring at us with his eyebrows drawn together. Now I have no idea what to do. How can we leave peacefully if he's just outside? What if he tries to come in? His gaze then moves to my friend. His pupils seem to dilate, and I know for a fact that he's undressing her with his eyes. I then notice he's slightly touching his crotch area as he continues to stare. Now I know that this creep has gone too fucking far. I turn back to the lady behind the counter and point my finger towards the sicko. As she turns her neck to look at him, her eyes widen. She stops making our subs and just leaves abruptly to go into the back room. The creep notices that something is off, and he just turns and leaves, walking brusquely out of the vicinity. When the lady comes back, she abruptly hands me a poster. The name on the poster said he was Keith. He was even a convicted rapist in Hamilton. He sexually assaulted a young boy in a park and raped a blind woman. He even raped and beat a young woman in her parents' basement. The poster listed the details of his parole. He was not allowed to be alone with children under the age of 16 and could not go to any community parks or pools. His curfew was 11 p.m., and unfortunately, when we looked at the time, it was only 10:08. This guy was listed as likely to reoffend. The thing that really creeped me out was his unnatural obsession with young boys and girls. That's why he was so fixated on my friend. We didn't know whether to notify his parole officer, since he technically didn't breach any of the conditions of his parole. We also didn't want to get in trouble for our parents for underage drinking and walking around at night, so we decided to just keep it to ourselves. Shortly after, I called my friend to come pick us up, because there was no way I was walking past his house again. This creep was the epitome of evil. He told the reporter that he calls his condition the devil's curse. He has to meet with a therapist once a week just to keep his sexual urges at bay. Thankfully, he was arrested a few days later for a breach in curfew. When I was younger, I loved having sleepovers at my cousin Adrian's house. She lived out in the country, on acres of beautiful wooded land, and her parents made sure that we had a good time. My other cousin, Aaron, would come over too, and we would all hike in the woods and play games outside all day. Well, one summer, when we were about 14, we had a sleepover at Adrian's house. Since it was out in the country, neighbors were far away. And the closest neighbor to her house was about a half a mile away, and this person happened to be her grandfather and step-grandmother. Her grandparents were popular people, and many family members would come out for a visit. During this particular sleepover, during the day, a distant relative was visiting Adrian's grandfather. This relative was old Uncle Duncan. I'm not sure how distantly he was related, or who he even really was. This was the first time I had seen or heard of him. We walked down to her grandpa's house and saw Duncan there. We said hello, and that was that. He looked like any creepy old mountain man, old and missing teeth and scraggly long beard. He didn't say much to us, but he kept staring at us the entire time we were there. After a while, we got creeped out and left. When we got back to her house, her mother asked us why we were back so soon, because we had told her we were going to hang out there for a while. Her grandpa had a swimming pool, and we were planning on swimming but decided against it since they had Duncan over. We told her mother who was visiting and how we were acting, and her mom looked at us with a very serious face. She said, "Don't ever be alone around Duncan. Do you understand?" When we asked why, she refused to talk about it. She just kept saying, "Just don't." After a while, we busied ourselves with teenage girl things like painting our nails and watching TV. We forgot all about Duncan. We decided it would be fun to go and camp out in the woods that night. This was something we did all the time, so we set everything up and got a bonfire going. We had a really great time hanging out and roasting hot dogs and marshmallows, all that good campy stuff. We even returned to her grandma's house and went swimming since we saw that Duncan was gone and her grandpa had said that it was okay. And we started getting tired at this point and got ready to sleep in the tent. The fire was down to embers, and we snuggled up into our sleeping bags and started to fall asleep. I'm halfway there when my cousin Aaron, who's laying awake next to me, grabs my arm. "Ow, what the hell?" "Shh," Aaron said. I hear footsteps outside the tent. I thought she was full of shit and trying to scare us, and I say as much, but she keeps insisting that she's hearing the footsteps. Adrian eventually hears us whispering and wakes up, then joins in on the conversation. She doesn't believe Aaron either, but sits up slowly and listens carefully. We wait about 5 minutes in silence, when we do hear heavy footsteps right outside our tent door. We all agree that we hear it with a silent nod and looks of terror on our faces. Adrian, who's a country girl, always has a pocket knife on her. She pulls it out of her boots that are inside the tent and pulls the blade out. She motions for us to come in close and whispers, "On 3, we run for the house." Since her house is only about a football field's length away from our campsite, we all agree. She counts, and we rip the tent door open and run for all it's worth. We don't see anything, but we think we hear someone chasing us. Eventually we get to our house, and the back door is unlocked because they live in the country and normally don't worry about it. We lock the door behind us and pant in relief. When we walk into her room, we collapse on the bed and start laughing about how we were paranoid and were sure no one was there. It doesn't take long for us to fall asleep. I wake up to my cousins freaking out the next morning. I ask why they won't stop shrieking, and Adrian shows me a piece of paper. Apparently it was slipped under her door in the middle of the night, because she found it when she got up to go to the bathroom that morning. It was on the back of an old receipt. It was in blue pen. All it said was, "Sorry I missed you. Love, Uncle Duncan." We show the note to Adrian's mom, and her mom explains that Duncan is a convicted child molester, which is why she doesn't want us to be alone around him. We show her the note, and she calls the police. I haven't seen or heard anything about Uncle Duncan since. I've posted here before, but because I was a reckless child, I wanted to share another story with you. This happened 17 years ago, so please forgive me if the exact details are a little bit fuzzy. It was the summer of 1999, and I was spending the vacation with my mother in New Mexico. I was a 12-year-old girl going 21 and had a severe attitude. I made friends easily with the few girls that lived just around the corner from my mom's house. We spent every moment together that summer. We were a group of 4, all of us thinking we were older and smarter than everyone else. Nikki, Katie, Julie, and myself were the last generation of home phone lines, playing outside on the trampolines until dark, and sleepovers. We watched VHS tapes, listened to cassette tapes on our Walkman. It was okay to let your children walk around town at night, and we rarely locked the front door. We had no cell phones or internet. My backyard had a concrete wall around it and a gate. Behind the wall was desert as far as the eye could see. Just a barren wasteland of dirt, cacti, shrubs, and mountains way off in the distance. This town had a major railroad track running straight through it, and there was a major street that had gas stations galore, restaurants, hotels, and other attractions. We all received the same warnings from our parents. Stay out of the desert, stay away from the tracks, and don't walk the main strip at night. Do you think we listened? Julie, Nikki, and I practically spent our days walking through the desert, crossing the tracks and down the strip to Katie's house. Sometimes we would just walk around till dusk. Some days we would go to my house to jump on the trampoline. This particular day, we got to Katie's house prepared to stay the weekend because her parents were out of town and we were having a party. The first night, the girls were jumping from a spiral staircase to a giant beanbag. I refused to participate due to my extreme fear of heights. We then got down to sleepover business, so to say, and decided to watch the original Exorcist. You know, the one with Linda Blair. Fucking scary shit, man. I didn't sleep. The second night, we all told our parents that Katie's mom, since we obviously didn't tell our parents we were alone, was going to drive us to the movies. We all got money, and then proceeded to walk down the strip to get junk food at the little store. Now I wish I could say that we were aware of our surroundings, but we weren't. We were absolutely oblivious of the man who followed us all the way back to the house. I feel that I should mention that Katie's parents were loaded. They had a huge property, with numerous buildings and broken down cars that our dad was remodeling. Their house had a large open kitchen, dining and living room. There were no walls, and the whole room was lined with windows. There were 2 doors, front and back. The day went just as planned. We got our junk food and made it home safely. We made pizza in the oven, and for some reason one of the girls turned on the TV to the news. As we were eating, we heard a story about staying indoors because there was a report of a suspicious man walking the strip. That's it. Just a suspicious man. We laughed and joked about this guy. Fast forward a few hours. I don't remember exactly what happened, but as girls do, someone said something that hurt Julie's feelings, and she stormed out of the house. I went after her and opened the front door just in time to see her light up a cigarette. I sat with her on a bench while she bitched about the other 2. Suddenly the air got thick with anxiety. Julie felt it too. I quietly asked if she felt like we were being watched. She responded with a tiny nod, and then we were blinded. Someone was in a car in the driveway with their brights on us. My heart was racing as I stood up and pulled Julie out of the spot she seemed to be stuck in. As we turned to run inside, the man made a sound. I can't describe this sound other than a high-pitched squeal that turned into a growl. I was scared beyond all reason, but I somehow managed to get myself and Julie inside the house. As soon as we got inside, the headlights went off, and it was pitch black again. I locked the door and turned off all the lights. By this time, Julie had regained her composure to tell the other 2 what had happened, as I frantically checked the back door and turned every light off. I told them to shut up, and we listened by the back door. I heard the car door close, and I was praying to God that he would go away. Then right by my cheek, the door handle started to turn slowly, then frantically. I crawled away from the door and moved to where my friends were. For the next 2 or 3 hours, we sat still as stone and listened to this man bang on every window and door trying to get inside. The phone was located across the room, right next to 2 windows. I finally got up the courage to run to the phone, and I called my mom. I told her that we were all alone, and that someone was trying to get inside. I hung up with her and waited. Julie screamed to the man that we called the cops, and all of a sudden the banging stopped. We sat and waited, listening to him get in his car. And then, that sound again, and the squeal that turned into a growl, and then he was gone. My mom and stepdad showed up and checked the whole place out. They found tire tracks and cigarette butts in the driveway where his car was, proving he had been watching us for quite a while. The truly scary part was that there were scratch marks all over the doors and windows. Needless to say, Katie spent the rest of the weekend at Nikki's house and had a great story for her parents when they got home. Our parents didn't punish us for lying and being reckless. I guess 2 hours of torture at the hands of a madman was enough. We made a report to the police, but the man was never caught. Long-time lurker here, and I always contemplated telling my story. I feel like I'm finally ready to revisit that time in my life. Maybe that's because my mother finally forgave herself. I was 10 years old and had just started 5th grade. I made a new friend in school named Janie. My parents allowed me to go for a sleepover at her house. They had met her mom once. My mom and dad were pretty laid back because I was their last kid. My sisters were 9 or 13 years older than me. So my mom dropped me off, said hello to Janie's mom, and left. Me and Janie started playing karaoke when her mom decided she was going to leave. She said goodbye to us, gave us kisses on the cheek, and I remember thinking she smelled like black licorice. Me and Janie were left to do whatever we wanted for the next 5 hours. Her older sister came home around 1 a.m. and told us that we should go to bed because we were falling asleep on the couch, so we went to her room and laid in her bed. Later that night, I can't be sure what time because it was pitch dark, Janie's mom came home. I woke up to a pounding sound on Janie's bedroom door. I started to yell in fear when I felt a hand over my mouth. It was Janie telling me to be quiet and pretend to be asleep. But at that moment, it was too late. Her mom had kicked the door open, stormed over to the bed, and grabbed Janie's face. She began screaming at Janie because we accidentally left the TV on. I was trying to hide under the covers, but she saw me. She began slamming her fists on the bed around me and screamed, "You think you're better than me?" over and over. I was sobbing, and all I could think about was going home. I was so scared, and I begged her mom to let me call my parents because I felt sick. Her mom grabbed my chin, looked me in the eyes, and said, "I know what you're doing, little girl. You aren't going anywhere until I say you can." She stormed out of the room, slamming the half-broken bedroom door behind her. Janie said nothing, and neither did I. Needless to say, I didn't sleep that night. In the morning when I went to call my mom, Janie's mom was on the phone. She wouldn't let me use it, even though I asked multiple times. Finally, she was going to take a shower, and I heard her pass the phone off to Janie's sister and say, "Don't let that little bitch use this phone. If you do, I ain't buying you cigarettes anymore." I was a sheltered kid at the time, but when I overheard that, I knew I had to get out of there. I approached Janie's sister, and she basically threw the phone at me. She was ready to give it to me long before I asked for it. With a look of fear in her eyes, she said, "My mom is calling her guy, so you need to call your home now." And so I did. She saved my life, and I still believe that to this day. Was her guy someone who was going to get rid of me? I shudder at the thought. The rest of the story isn't as exciting. My mom picked me up, and I acted like nothing was wrong. 2 days later, it was my parents' day in school. Janie was in my class, which meant her mom was there. Her mom approached me and asked me why I never wanted to come over anymore, and accused me of being a mean girl. She talked to me in a way that seemed harmless, and therefore wasn't obvious to my mom or my teacher. I kept my mouth shut and didn't say a word. Until 2 weeks later. My elder sister was babysitting me while her parents were at the movies, and I broke down and told her what happened because I couldn't stop thinking about it. She comforted me and told my parents, and we hugged each other and cried. A couple weeks later, Janie stopped coming to school. My classmates wondered what happened, and so did I. I didn't want to ask my parents because I didn't want to know. 15 years later, I heard from Janie on Facebook. There was no life-changing conversation. All we did was exchange pleasantries. But I guess that's life sometimes. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here, as always. I just wanted to thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you guys enjoyed the video, please feel free to leave feedback in the comments below, as well as perhaps like, share, or subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have a personal story that you'd like to submit, or you'd like to just send me a message, links to all of my social media will be in the description for the video below. This includes my Gmail, Twitter, and Facebook accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the theme of the story is, if it has any, the name of the story, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. If you're curious at all about the music used in this video, the music is always listed in the description below, in the order which it appears. I also have links to the artists and list the tracks by name, just in case you want to find more of their work. Last but not least, if you have any criticism, please be sure to leave it in the comments below, as I'm always looking for new ways to improve the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.
Good evening all, and welcome. Before the video begins, it is the final few hours of the Black Friday sale, so if you want any of the new merch with the discount code, feel free to get it now. But without further ado, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This took place in San Francisco in the early 90s. I was a 33-year-old female living alone there. I had a good job, and I was very interested in real estate. I decided to walk to a neighborhood grocery store to pick up a real estate magazine. That's what you did back then. We didn't really have the internet yet. It was a rare, warm evening in San Francisco, and there were quite a few people walking around outside. I was walking behind a group of about 5 or 6, apparently unrelated people. At least, they weren't talking to each other. So that is what I assumed. I'm rather short, so all I could really see were their backs. When suddenly, without a single word from any of them, they all turned around and started walking back in the direction we had just come from. I was a bit amazed by this, and turned to look at them, sort of shrugged it off, and kept going in my original direction. As I turned my head, I was stunned to see a man was just in front of me pointing a gun, grinning like a madman. He was about my height, wearing those green mechanic's overalls covered head to toe in grease and dirt. Startled, I was just about 2 feet from him, and my gut reaction was just to continue going forward, so I passed him with every muscle in my body tense, heart racing, and kept walking. To my dismay, I heard his footsteps following me. Then he started whispering, "Oh, are you bad, huh? Why don't you run?" At that moment, my mind seized on the belief that he was waiting for me to run before he shot me in the back. He seemed to want it so badly, so I was determined to do the opposite. I kept walking, expecting to feel a bullet slam into my spine at any moment. That shot didn't come, and I believed then and now that if I had run, that would have given him the piece of his fantasy that he needed, if that makes sense. I headed up a hill and around a corner to a gas station with people in it. It was dark already, and when I turned around, he was gone. This happened in 2012, and there are not many people I've shared this story with. For my birthday in 2012, me and my ex-husband visited Krakow for a short break. My main interest was to visit Auschwitz and the Jewish quarter of the city, and Schindler's factory, which is now a museum. We arrived just prior to the Christmas market's opening. I remember being disappointed that we wouldn't be able to experience this. We stayed in a very nice hotel. I won't divulge the name, but it was around 15 minutes away from the main square and cloth market. We had a beautiful balcony over the river, and it was a very lovely hotel with hospitable staff. We flew in on a cheap budget flight around mid-afternoon, showered, changed, and got ready to explore. The weather was cold and dreary, with some light drizzle, but more than okay to walk along the river into Krakow main city. Krakow is an exceptionally beautiful city, and I loved it. We had a good look at the cloth market, ate a meal of matzo balls and stew in the main square under blankets and heated lights, and watched the famous clock tower, and even managed to visit the lovely shopping center with excellent shops, where I purchased a lovely cashmere coat from Zara, and an equally important lovely hat and scarf, which are important details for later. Given it was our first night, we had a few drinks, which turned into a few more. We ended our evening in a lovely bar beneath the city, as most bars appear to be underground and in the catacombs. I was overjoyed. As a smoker, we're usually social lepers, but we could still smoke cigarettes in this bar. Around 1 a.m., we were tired and decided to head home to our comfy hotel. We made our way up the stairs from the bar to street level, and a taxi ramp was right outside. We jumped in a taxi and let the driver know the location of our hotel. Unfortunately, the driver would only accept cash, so we explained that we would need to get to a cash point at some point along the 5-minute journey to the hotel. He seemed to understand and was fine with this. At this point, I needed to make you know that I had no mobile phone with me. It was back in the hotel. In those days, roaming had to be paid for, so we decided we would only take my ex-husband's phone. It was 2012. I think I only had an iPhone 3S and it was due for renewal anyway, and the 5-minute journey was uneventful. We arrive opposite to our hotel, which is kind of a dual carriageway with a petrol station and cash points on opposite sides. My ex-husband signaled the driver to pull in to use the cash point and exited the taxi. As my ex-husband was in the cash point, my nightmare began. As soon as he dropped him off and seeing he was withdrawing money, the taxi driver locked all the doors and sped off. I was in the back seat with several shopping bags and had no idea what was going on. The taxi driver took the main dual carriageway out of the city and kept on speeding. Initially, I thought he was looking for a place to turn around and pick up my ex-husband, but this wasn't the case. The taxi driver continues to speed until we were out of the city limits. He spoke no English, and I asked if he wanted money. I showed him my empty bags and shopping bags and asked him what was going on. At this point I was scared, but I assumed there was a misunderstanding. Once the taxi driver continued past the Krakow outskirts, I was terrified. The outskirts of Krakow are rural. No street lights, just black and snow and ice. The taxi driver shouted at me, but I couldn't understand a word. Eventually, he pushed me physically and forced me with my head into the back seat and told me, I can only assume, to shut up. He then started talking on the phone with a man. The journey carried on for another 20 minutes until we arrived to what appeared to be an industrial estate. No houses, some street lights, but the whole area was just a warehouse of factories and fields. The taxi driver was still on his phone, sounding angry, then abruptly turned off the car. By this point, I was petrified. I can honestly say I have never been so scared in all my life. I was praying and begging that my life wouldn't end here. 34, the mother of 5-year-old twins, and ending up dead in a lockup on an industrial estate as some sort of mutilated rape victim. For about 30 seconds, it was quiet, apart from my sobbing and begging. Then the taxi driver got out, came around the back door, grabbed me and threw me on the side of the road. He grabbed the shopping bags and hurled it at me, got in the taxi, and drove off. The relief never came, as I was sure he was going to get other men to harm me or do terrible things to me. I gathered myself up. It was probably -8 Celsius in late November and snowing heavily, and looked for some kind of doorway, a hedge or any kind of shelter, bearing in mind I was just left here outside an industrial estate. I walked some meters away and found a gap in a hedge and sat down, pulled my coat and bags around me and cried my heart out. I have no idea how long I was there, maybe an hour, maybe 2, but the sky started to get light, and a few cars and vans came past me. I tried to flag someone down, but it was no good. I sat back down. I was frozen. I can honestly say, I think I was dying and had no more energy left. All I know is that some lovely Polish people turned up at around 5 a.m. I was sprawled across the road, hard shoulder, and a brother and sister going to the market with their cattle stopped and picked me up, dragged me to their truck, and put a big cow poo-stained jacket around me. I couldn't speak apparently. I was just trying to talk to my children, and they found out my location from a napkin in my bag. These wonderful people drove me 20 miles back to Krakow to my hotel, where my ex-husband, police, the hotel owner, manager, and the Polish equivalent of the CID were all in the process of setting up a command center. They dropped me off, still wearing the poo-stained jacket. They were questioned and went back on their way to the market. I never even got their names. I was swabbed, photographed, and fingerprinted, etc., and got a stiff brandy from the bar. The following day, we visited Auschwitz-Birkenau, the main reason for the Krakow trip. That evening, we were taken by police to the taxi rank, where I had got the taxi from, to try and identify the driver, but he wasn't there. It was left with Polish police, but dear God, I must have had someone looking out for me that night. This happened in the late 80s, when I was home one summer on break from college. About 2 years prior, my dad had purchased an old house with the intention of eventually tearing it down to build a new one. The house was built in 1916, and like most homes built in that era, it had a really unconventional floor plan. There was a central living room and kitchen like any normal home, but the 3 bedrooms were more akin to separate apartments. Each had its own separate outside entrance, a private bathroom, and a door that led to a common living area and kitchen. Perhaps the place was originally intended to be a boarding house or something. I really don't know. The other thing that was a little creepy about the house was that it was all wood. The ceilings, the walls, the floors were all brown, with nothing ever being painted nor plastered. My dad was a pretty cool guy. While he was waiting for permits and financing, he let 3 of my friends live there for free in exchange for watching the place. They had a lot of parties, but my dad didn't care as long as none of the neighbors complained. I went to a few of the parties there myself, when I was lucky enough to be home from college, that is. Eventually, 2 of my friends moved out, leaving my one buddy there to watch the mostly empty house on his own. He was not the type of person to be afraid of living alone in a half-empty house, so he was fine with the situation. I'm at home one afternoon when the phone rings. It's my buddy, and he sounds terrified. He asks me to call the police and meet him out in front of the driveway of the house, but to under no conditions go in. I ask him why, and he tells me there is a crazy clown in the house. Apparently he was sick with the flu in bed for the previous 2 days. When he finally felt well enough to go into the kitchen to get something to eat, he runs face to face with a crazy woman dressed in a clown suit and makeup who starts screaming at him. It was then that he ran out of the house and called me in a panic from a nearby gas station. I call the police and then drive over to the house, which was 2 miles away. That's where I find my buddy, on the sidewalk out in front, really shaken up. I ask him to describe what he saw, and he keeps saying there's a crazy clown woman in the house. I ask for more specific details, and he describes her as dressed in a white clown suit with red makeup smeared all over her face. He's still a little sick, and he looks really bad, and honestly, he's really freaking me out as well. There's no way in hell I was going to go into that house to investigate his story. After what seems like an eternity, the cops show up. My buddy tells them the exact same story, and the cops then go inside the house while we wait outside. After 5 minutes, they emerge escorting a crazy clown woman who looks exactly as my friend described her, with her wild, unkempt brown hair, wearing this all-white body jumper suit. But what was really disturbing was her face. She had a tube of lipstick which she had crudely spread red all over her cheeks in a failed attempt to make them look rosy. Although we were both freaked out, the cops thought it was hilarious. The clown woman claimed it was her house and then accused us of being on drugs and trespassing on her property. When the cops told her to get in the back of the squad car, he warned him that she had powerful friends in Tinseltown who would have him fired. When he comes back to talk to us, He tells us he can't arrest her for breaking and entering because the house was half abandoned. He said the best he could do was drive for a few blocks away in the hope she didn't wander back. This, of course, freaked us out even more. Fortunately, though, when they run a background check on her, it turns out she has an outstanding warrant and would be going to jail instead. And that was the last time we saw her. When we go back into the house, we find all kinds of crazy stuff written on the kitchen cabinets in the same red lipstick that she had rubbed all over her face. There was also some 10-day-old fish in the fridge that my friend never got around to eating, that she cooked on the stove and ate. The really scary thing was that this crazy woman was in the same house with my friend for at least a day while he was sick and semi-delirious in bed with fever. She was probably harmless, but who knows what she would have done if she had stumbled upon him while he was sleeping. His door was unlocked the entire time. Fortunately, she never did as far as we're aware. One of the things she wrote on the cabinets in lipstick was her name. While I'm not allowed to disclose it here, I actually Googled her and found a mugshot of her that was taken some years later. This happened way back in the 1980s. I was 5 years old, and I was invited to a neighbor's birthday party. We lived in the quiet suburbs of Baltimore, Maryland. It was an idyllic town. Trees lined the streets, looking over the neighborhood like giant looming sentinels. It was early October. The houses were decorated for Halloween, and the boys' parents had pulled out all the stops to make sure their son's party was one to remember. There was a slow-moving, sad-faced donkey that the smaller children were permitted to ride. I, being a fat boy at age 5, was not allowed to ride the donkey. I was also very loud, and it was my loud mouth that caused this pleasant afternoon of cake, ice cream, and piñata to quickly unravel into a horrifying nightmare. Aside from the usual entertainment at a 7-year-old's party, there was a clown. The clown walked around silently, prancing and smiling. He would laugh silently. He would do the old, "I got your nose" trick, and pull coins out from behind our ears. He made balloon animals and attempted to ride a unicycle. The other kids laughed. I hated the clown. Everything about him made me uncomfortable, and because of this, my fat 5-year-old self decided it was a decent idea to give the clown a hard time. The birthday boy announced aloud that it was time to head inside to see the special clown magic show. All the kids went into the living room and sat on the hardwood floor. I stood in the back. The clown proceeded with the magic show. He pulled a fake rabbit out of his hat and performed other hat tricks. As I stood in the back of the room and jeered him, I would yell out how the tricks were done. The clown continued to silently smile, making no sound as he went about his magical presentation. His face said happiness, but his eyes screamed rage at me. This went on for 15 minutes. The kids laughed as the clown fumbled through some crappy dime store magic tricks. I do not know if it was an act of mercy, but the birthday boy's parents shouted, "Piñata time!" and all the kids ran outside to smash a cardboard donkey stuffed with candy. After a few minutes outside, all of the fruit punch I had drunk throughout the day wanted out, so I scurried back into the house in search of the toilet. The house was quiet, and the sun had shifted in the sky, leaving the kitchen and the adjoining hallway bathed in a murky, early evening light. As I walked through the kitchen and into the hall, from another room in the hall stepped the clown and into the hallway. He stood there staring at me, and I stared at him. It seemed like one of those Wild West showdowns from the cowboy movies, except he was a clown and I was a 5-year-old. He slowly turned towards me, his painted smile unwavering, but his eyes were bloodshot and filled with unbridled hatred. "Here, piggy piggy." I walked a few steps in reverse before spinning on my heels and trying to make it to the kitchen. I felt a large hand land on my shoulder, and I was spun around forcefully and fell to the floor. The clown stood above me for a moment before putting a giant clown shoe on my fat chest. I remember trying to squirm. I remember wanting to scream and cry for help, but it never happened. He stood over me, pinning me to the floor before brandishing one of those old-style seltzer bottles, and proceeded to spray the crotch of my pants in a sing-song voice, "Piggy going pee-pee," until the contents of the bottle were drained. When he removed his foot from my chest, I lashed out with my feet, kicking at his shins and trying to scurry away. I ran into a pantry and slammed the door. It was really a terrible hiding place. He had seen where I went. The pantry was about 4 feet away from where I was laying on the floor just moments ago. It was dark in the pantry and smelled of Pine Sol cleaning solvent. There was no lock on the door inside to protect me from the clown. In the dark pantry, I slid to the floor and tried not to sob uncontrollably. Minutes passed. They felt like hours. I heard no sound other than my wheezing and a fear fart that squeaked out. "Oh, Piggy, did you make poopy in the pantry?" The voice came inside the dark pantry in which I was hiding. Or so I thought. I froze in fear, not moving, not breathing. I did not know where the clown was, if he was in the pantry with me, but I needed to get out. If he was there, I needed to stay in. I lowered my head to the floor, and squinting through the gap between the bottom of the pantry door and the floor, there wasn't much to see. What little light bled through the bottom was quickly blacked out by a bloodshot eye staring back at me from the other side of the door. There was a low, guttural laugh, and a voice that either hissed, "Boo, Piggy," or "Pooh, Piggy." I squeezed my eyes shut and started crying at near hysterical level. The door swung open, and I screamed as loudly as I could. But standing in the doorway was my dad. "What the hell are you doing?" he asked. "Clown!" I screamed. He carried me out of the pantry and out of the house and back to the safety of our own house. Let me give you some background. At the time of this story, I was 23. I'm only 5'2" and weigh about 170 pounds. I had just moved to Jackson, Tennessee from Miami, Florida, because I had just gotten out of an extremely physically, emotionally, and mentally abusive relationship that lasted 3 years. About sometime in June, my current boyfriend and I had been doing trips pretty much every weekend. We would visit a new hiking and waterfall area, and although there isn't a nightlife, Tennessee is amazingly beautiful. We went to this place called Narrows of the Harpeth. This was one of the underwhelming places we've been to, but still relaxing. After we found a cool place to sit and swim after hiking for 2 hours, a few shots and one blunt later, it was time to make the hour trip back to Jackson. I put my shoes back on, slipped my dress back on, which is a little bit above the knee length, like if I bend down too far my bum will be on display. I own my body and sexuality, so showing skin never really bothered me, and I didn't really think about it, because I just expect people to respect me as I respect them, and the way they dress. On the way back to the car, I being the tipsy dumbass I am, I managed to trip and fall and scrape my leg pretty badly. It actually scarred now. I tell my boyfriend that we need to go back to Walmart once in Jackson, so that I could thoroughly clean my wound with hydrogen peroxide and Neosporin. My boyfriend says okay. An hour later, we're at the Walmart. Mind you, it's about 9 p.m. going on 10, not late by any means. So we get what I need, but because I'm still a bit tipsy and pretty high from the blunt I'd finished in the car ride home, I get distracted very easily. And remembered that my boyfriend got me the wrong size case for my iPhone 11 Pro. He got Max instead. I wanted an idea of what I could trade it in for, and he wanted to look at some of the games as well as the gaming PC for me. I'm so happily tipsy and excited to find a new case, which if you've ever been to a Walmart with the case section, they're never in order and often causes you to bend down to look for things. There was a man looking at the cases, and I just said, "Excuse me, can I have those cases you're standing in front of?" He looked at me with a blank yet dirty look, nodded and stepped over. As I'm happily looking through the shelf about 5 minutes in, and this lady and what I assume are her 2 children approach me. Mind you, we're in the middle of the pandemic, and I'm thrown off by how close they are to me, with her baby that looks no older than 9 months. I step back, and she grabs my arm and says, "Oh my god, wow, I haven't seen you in forever. Look at that hair, wow." And her grip tightens. At this point, my heart is racing. My face gets so hot and I'm visibly scared. That's when my boyfriend says, "Everything okay, bae?" He looks at me equally concerned. I'm thinking to myself, does this lady know my mum? Who is she? Is she an old friend I don't remember? Mind you, I'm originally from Ohio. We have family here, but I don't know any of them that live in Tennessee. And my mum loves to brag about her kids, so I'm trying to shake this weird feeling, but her daughter keeps looking behind me. So I go around and she goes, "No, don't turn around, walk with me please, trust me." I don't know why, but she was genuine, so I followed her. We step over to the side by the baby clothes, which is still in front of the electronics, and she goes, "Baby, I'm so sorry to scare you, but there are 3 men surrounding you. They went by the laptops, talked, and then I noticed a guy taking photos and a video of you while you were bent over looking at the cases. The other man was the tall guy next to you, and I don't know where the third one went." All I can remember is this high-pitched ringing in my ear. My stomach flipped and I felt like I was going to be sick. I never knew what people meant when they say everything slowed down, but in that moment everything moved in slow motion, and I was freaked out to the point that I have no clue what she said after. It was as if I blacked out for a moment, and then quickly came to the realization that the family and my boyfriend were looking at me, visibly panicked. I turned around, and there he was. He was Hispanic, shorter than me, maybe 5'1", but he looked very much built and also looked to be in his 40s. The other man, who was white and maybe in his 40s, was 5'11". I'll never forget the dead blank rage that the Hispanic man's eyes showed. Like his first meal in 5 days had been stolen from under him, and he was ready to kill in order to have it back. They said something, both looked at me, looked back at each other, said something else and started to walk slowly towards us. At that point we all turned and headed for the register, and that's when I thanked my lucky stars because there were about 3 cops at the front of the store. By the time I rudely pushed past the people to get to the self-checkout with tears in my eyes and frantically repeating excuses to anyone who got in front of me, I looked back and saw them just standing there, but with a third guy. My heart sank as I wanted to pass out at that moment. I guess it looked like I was going up to the cops because they hightailed it once they saw me approach them. Me being high as hell and a black woman, I wasn't going to chance the cops turning this around on me because I was simply stoned and tipsy. My only thought was, get into the car, get to the gun, don't stop, run. My boyfriend said he could barely keep up with me, and at one point I grabbed his hand so tight he had to force the grip off because it felt like I was going to crush his hand. And before anyone bashes my boyfriend, I don't expect a man to be my savior. He isn't the angry confrontational type anyway. He is calm and level-headed. He wouldn't hurt a fruit fly unless I asked him to get rid of it for whatever reason. I just knew I was the target, and I was putting him at risk. I knew they could easily jump him, and one of them could overpower him after taking him out. I probably looked crazy halfway walking and running past everyone, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to become another missing sister. We made it to the car safely and peeled out of there. I've never seen him drive so fast. He is beyond careful and would never speed. We sat at a Sonic for about an hour to make sure we weren't being followed. We recounted everything that happened. I just couldn't believe we were both too tipsy to notice that I had become prey in somewhere as simple as Walmart. I've never felt so stupid and irresponsible in my life. I never want to experience that fear and panic again. I didn't even get a chance to thank the lady who pretty much saved us. Sometimes we talk about it. What if the lady didn't see what the guy was doing? Even if we catch on, there were 3 of them, and we only saw 2 at first. I think of the horrors. That night I had a nightmare that the man attacked us in the parking lot. The creepiest part of the dream was the 3rd man shoved me in the trunk. As I went to look at his face, all I could see was a featureless face. I woke up in tears that night, realizing I didn't get a clear look at his face. It took me nearly a month to enter the Walmart again. Since, I have moved states, and I've only been to Walmart once since moving here. To the creepy men that stalked me, upskirted me, and basically followed me, even though they knew I was around other people, I genuinely hope we all never meet again, because the gun I carry on my person now has 3 beautiful hallows that will enjoy meeting you all. I am a female, and this story takes place when I was 18. I was hanging out with my friend one day when we ended up at her house for the evening, where she ended up falling asleep. Unable to fall asleep myself, I was bored and decided I wanted to see my boyfriend at the time. I called him a bunch of times, but after getting no response, I decided I could wait no longer, and that I had to go at that very moment. Yet instead of waking up my friend, I had the brilliant idea of walking there, at night, 4 miles away, through long stretches of desolate road, to an area that was known to be crime-ridden. I know, possibly one of the dumbest things I've ever done, so after gathering up all my belongings, I headed out into the night. Now, as I'm making my way out of the town my friend lives in, I encountered the cops who stopped me and asked what I was doing. I remember feeling a sense of relief, as I had been increasingly feeling dread. I thought they would offer me a ride home, as they knew how far away it was, and the area I was going isn't great. After telling them why I'm out and where I'm going, they ask for my ID, which I hand over. After checking it, they hand it back and they pause. I remember that pause, because there was a feeling in the air, and I thought they must feel it too. It was just a feeling that something bad was going to happen. I recall even getting a flash of them reading the newspaper next morning with my missing picture in it. It was very weird. After the long pause, instead of helping me, they bid me good evening, and I went back on my way, trying to chalk up my feelings as imagination. Well, the first 3 miles were uneventful, but I continued to make my way through the night, finally getting closer to my destination. But this also meant I was going into the more dangerous parts of the area. Now, the road I was walking down was a main road, fairly heavier traffic, although less so later in the evening. Houses, apartments, and small businesses lined both sides of the streets. Well, as I was about 5 blocks away, I noticed the same van circling around. Immediately, this got my radar up, as I was already on edge and paying close attention to my surroundings. Well, as I was about halfway down that particular block I was walking, I noticed the same van had come up the side street in front of me and sat at the end of it not moving. There wasn't much traffic, so no real reason it should be just sitting there. Well, I stopped and waited because there was no way I was going to be walking up to this car so they could grab me. Obviously, at a standoff, the van eventually then turned left onto the main road and stopped by me. I continued to walk quickly by as a man rolled down the window and yelled, "Hey, do you need a ride?" I looked over and noticed there was also a woman in the passenger seat, looking at me expectantly. I did not check if there was anyone else in the back. Now, the thing about this area is that it was a heavy drug area, mainly crack and actual places you could drive up and buy it. Now, you grow accustomed to seeing drug addicts and their sunken, hollowed-out faces, so I know these were drugs without a doubt. Even so, I wasn't going to stick around and quickly shook my head and kept walking, quickening my pace and more eager to get home, my head on a swivel. After another 2 blocks, I see a different vehicle, a pickup truck now, stop by me, and it was the same man from earlier. This time he yells, "I got rid of her. Do you want to get in now?" We're now terrified, and knowing these people had ill intent. I mean, why are you in a pickup truck without that woman still looking for me? Especially if you're obviously a crackhead, which aren't known for their generosity. So now I'm really hauling ass trying to get away and speed walking. I don't pay that much attention to where he went exactly, as I'm happy to be coming up to the intersection that will take me to my home stretch, with a big hospital on the corner and also big concrete medians separating the lanes, which would make it impossible for a car to drive over to follow me. I knew this was my chance. My boyfriend lived across the intersection with a CVS on the corner and down the alley. I had a split-second decision. Do I run to the hospital and wait it out? Or do I go across and down the more main part of the street, or risk going through the CVS parking lot and down the alley? The alley, I knew, had a fence all along the side next to the houses, so I knew they couldn't chase me through the yards. I quickly surveyed the area, but didn't see the van near me, so I made my decision. I flew across the intersection, through the CVS parking lot, and ran like hell down the alley. I made it to my boyfriend's house, through the opening of the fence on the alley side, ran the yard and up the long back stairs to bring me to the second floor, to the only entrance at the back of the house, finally making it upstairs. Out of breath and still terrified, I stopped at the top. This area was completely closed in, and I could easily see, out at the alley, without being seen, well, like straight out of a nightmare. I looked down and saw the same van from the beginning, slowly driving down the alley, clearly looking for me. Whether they saw me run up those stairs, or were still continuing to look for me, I didn't know. I don't know what would have happened if they'd have ever caught me, but I'm relatively certain I wouldn't have made it out alive. About 10 years ago, I was 20 years old, going to college and trying to make a little extra money. I picked up a job working in Flint as a living caregiver for a 98-year-old woman called Lillian who had Alzheimer's. Honestly, I wasn't trained the way I should have been to properly care for her. I did a lot of research and tried my best to learn everything I could to make the situation as comfortable as possible for her. Needless to say, though, I did get frustrated sometimes. One of those times was a hot summer night around 2 a.m. I awoke to Lillian screaming from her bedroom. I ran to find her sitting in her laundry basket. After helping her up, I noticed that she had wet herself. I took her to the bathroom to get her cleaned up, and she told me she thought the laundry basket was the toilet, and after she sat in it, she couldn't get out. I felt so sorry for her. I tried my best to reassure her that it would be okay. I told her I would clean everything up, run her laundry again, and stay up the rest of the night in case she needed anything. Once Lillian fell back asleep, I threw her laundry in and decided I had time to sneak out for a quick cigarette. I decided to sit in my car and use the air conditioning to stay cool and call my best friend to see if she was still up, so that I could vent a little. I wanted to talk to someone as it was late at night and I was alone in my car. Being female, we're wired to be nervous about being alone at night, unfortunately. I hadn't been on the phone for more than 2 minutes when I got a strange feeling. Something was telling me to look over my shoulder, and when I did, I see a younger guy, maybe in his early 20s, walking down the sidewalk in my direction with a sweatshirt on and his hood up. Now remember, this is the middle of summer, so immediately I felt something was off. But who am I to say this guy isn't cold? One of my flaws is being too afraid to hurt people's feelings. I knew in that moment that I needed to lock my doors, but I didn't want this guy to hear the sound of my doors locking and feel like I thought he was a criminal for just walking down the sidewalk. My body is screaming warning signs at me. The hair on the back of my neck was standing on end, and it felt hard to breathe. I knew my friend was still talking, but I couldn't really hear a word she said. I was afraid to turn my head and see where he was. I was frozen. Suddenly, my friend's voice became clear to me. She was yelling, "Hey, why aren't you answering me? What's going on?" I turned my head to the right, just in time to see him reaching for the passenger door handle. Without even time to think, I managed to reach up with my left hand and hit the lock button for the doors, just as he began pulling for the handle. His right hand was right in front of the pocket of his sweatshirt. He seemed to have been holding onto something with his other hand. He was pulling at my handle with such force that the entire car was jerking back and forth. I didn't move, I didn't scream, I just watched him. I remembered his eyes staring into mine. He looked angry. Just as I started to think, this is it. He's going to get in somehow. He's going to hurt or kill me. He suddenly stops. He stood there for a quick second and then turned and ran away. In that moment, I burst into tears. I was scared, angry, and confused. What just happened? What was he trying to do? Kill me? Steal my car? Is he going to come back? Lastly, even though I was happy with it, why did he suddenly stop and run away like that? I called 911, and the dispatcher asked me if there was any way for me to leave the area. I wanted to, but then I realized Lillian. I needed to get back to the house. I was terrified to step foot out of my car. I took a few deep breaths and decided I didn't have time to think about it. I needed to make sure she was okay. I got back into the house and immediately went to her room. She was sound asleep, and I felt a huge sense of relief take over. I took a walk through the house and checked all the doors and windows to make sure we were safe. Everything was secure. I sat on the couch in the living room in the dark and waited for the cops to come. For those of you who don't know much about Flint, this type of call is not their top priority. It took them 4 hours to respond. At that point, obviously, there was nothing they could do. He was long gone. I still think about that night more often than I'd like to. The what-ifs are the hardest part. All I know is I hope to never be in a situation like that again. I lock my doors as soon as I get into my car now, especially since I now work third shift in the same city. I was a small-town girl with little to no experience in the dangers of the area back then. I don't take any chances anymore, and I am much more aware of my surroundings at the time. The idea of keeping the windows rolled up is something I never thought about, but will do so from now on. Be safe out there, everyone. When I was about 12, I was friends with this girl, Becky. Becky's mum was really sweet, and she understood that at the time my home life wasn't ideal, so she would take me out on trips to go shopping. Now, being from a really small town, our idea of a shopping trip was to go to Walmart. It was me, Becky, Becky's mum, and another one of our friends. I remember I was looking at ties because I fancied myself as some sort of emo kid at the time. That's when a very old man beckoned for my attention. He looked to be in his 60s or 70s, liver spots, hunch, pure white hair, the works. He pulls out a wallet and kind of croaks out, "Excuse me, miss, but could you help me find the price of this wallet?" So of course I'm thinking I'll help this guy out because why not? So I teeter over, grab the wallet, and as I'm looking for the price, he leans over and whispers in my ear, "You're a sexy girl, you know that." I turn around, assuming that I must have been hearing things, and ask if he could repeat himself. He says it again and proceeds to grab my arm. I look and see that Becky and the others are now nowhere to be seen, so I bolt into a completely random direction. Eventually, I managed to find them at the front of the store, so I just waited for Becky's mum to find me. When she asked where I went, I explained, so we left pretty hastily. I don't think I've ever feared for my safety in such a way before. This happened around 20 years ago nearly. I was around 10. My family and I lived in a small town in southern New Mexico. The nearest Walmart was about a half-hour away in Roswell. Every weekend we would take a shopping trip to Roswell. When we arrived at the Walmart, which appropriately decorated with aliens and flying saucers, my dad and I both had to pee. I was using the urinal when an older man walked in and started using the one next to me. Then without warning, he leans over and looks right over the partition, and not even trying to be subtle, he just starts staring at my prepubescent penis. Luckily, my dad had been washing his hands when that happens, and he shouts at the guy, "Hey buddy, what do you think you're doing?" He barely manages to get out, and then without another word, he turns and rushes out of the bathroom, not bothering to wash his hands nor flush the toilet. My dad was fuming and immediately went to contact the manager about the old pervert ogling his kids in the bathroom. The manager, completely unfazed, told my dad it wasn't the first time the guy had done something like that, and that the old perv was on a list of people in Walmart that they kept an eye on when they entered the store, and that he was also a registered sex offender. It's so great that they couldn't do anything about it, right? This happened when my grandmother was in her mid-30s. We had a house close to the park. The second floor had a large balcony overlooking the park. It was in a quiet, older part of town, the kind of place where you knew your neighbors. My grandmother was at the balcony sitting in the sun when she saw something she would never forget. There were 2 women and a child approaching a bench near the park. One of them has the child by the hand, and the child was blindfolded, and the other woman was looking around checking the surroundings. They both appeared to be in their 30s. One of the women knelt and appeared to be saying something to the child. The child stood there blindfolded as the women walked away. My grandmother waited for a few minutes as she continued watching the child. She waited for a few more minutes and then rushed to the park. It was a young boy about 4 years old. My grandmother was a very loving woman, and she had 3 children of her own, so she immediately became very protective. The kid couldn't speak. She waited there at the park with him for about an hour and no one came back. She wanted to take care of him, but she also thought that what if someone's child had got kidnapped or was lost and they were looking for them? She contacted the authorities, but never found out what became of the child. It is also unknown who the 2 women were that just abandoned this boy in the park. It's a mystery that has never left my mind. I hope they're doing okay now. When I was in college, I was walking across campus to my early morning class when this old white man with the bluest eyes I've ever seen stopped me to ask for bus ticket money. Everything went still around us, no sounds, the air felt stiff, but there was no one but us outside. The man's eyes were like aquamarine, but the rest of his face, it's like his skin was plastered on. His nose looked like it had been glued on with clay. His cheeks looked like they were barely hanging on to whatever was underneath, and he looked truly bizarre. He stops me and compliments my lipstick and asks if I could help him pay with the bus ticket so that he could visit his son. I told him, regrettably, I didn't have any cash. He never broke eye contact with me and tells me he's a veteran and takes his wallet out to show me his military lapel. When he opens it, I see a wad of cash in there, and he looks at me again and asks if I could help. While all of this was happening, the only thing I felt was that I was in danger. I truly thought I was in the presence of someone evil, even though he didn't say or do anything to provoke the feeling. I ended up reaching in my bag for quarters and gave them to him. He held my hand for what felt like forever, and let me go on my merry way. I think about this encounter a lot, because I felt like he was almost pretending to be human. His skin looked like it was made out of wet clay and badly placed. His eyes were so blue they were unnatural, and why ask for money when you already have it? Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I really hope that you enjoyed tonight's video. I made a really big effort to try and find some top quality Let's Not Meet stories, so I hope they were up to scratch. A huge thank you as always to my members and patrons. I've actually just posted an exclusive story that I will never publish on the channel on there about a hitchhiking gone horribly wrong. If you want to hear that, well, you know where to check it out now. Members and Patreon section. Thank you all for listening. You know, just you guys sticking around to the end and listening to my videos, it really means the world to me. You guys are the best. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. But until next time, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.